This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Isotope, SonarWorks, and API. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre in an API lunchbox mixed carefully through Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
I put a 87 and a 67 right there at that 12th fretish together, facing the source, facing the guitar, but I put them head to head. It's sort of pseudo stereo. It's just two microphones right next to each other that if I can blend them in mono, go for darkness versus brightness, transparency versus density.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. The Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love using my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which now sounds bigger than anything I've ever recorded before. Make your mixes rock at Spectra1964.com. In my studio, I've got the Mac Mini M1 paired up with the OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution to connect to all my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Dwayne Lundy, a music producer, mixer, and studio owner in Lexington, Kentucky. Dwayne has worked with hundreds of artists, from Grammy-Award winners like Sturgill Simpson and Flor de Toloache to critically acclaimed and eclectic Ben Sollee, Vandaveers, Jim James, and the Horse Feathers. Dwayne also works on projects that include legacy artists like Ringo Starr, McDonald, Bela Fleck, Robert Randolph, Earl Slick, Duff McKagan, and touring artists like Joe Pug, JDawn Landes, Daniel Rodriguez, as well as emerging buzz acts such as the National Reserve, Ian Noe, Brian Owens, Miles Nielsen, and the Rusted Hearts. Recently, he produced and engineered 2 tracks on the new Ringo Starr album, as well as produced and mixed Saving Country Music's 2016 Song of the Year, The Dogs, by Justin Wells. He also records his own music for television shows, feature films, and advertising like Sons of Anarchy, Weeds, NCIS, and BMW Mini Cooper, among many others. I met Dwayne in 2013 when he produced the Americana band The Breedings here at my studio, the Toy Box Studio in East Nashville, with me engineering. We had a blast recording to analog tape through my MCI console. I really enjoyed working with Dwayne. I felt like I learned a lot from him at the time, so I'm psyched to have him back. Thanks also to Justin Perkins for reconnecting us for this interview. Please welcome Dwayne Lundy to Recording Studio Rockstars. Dwayne, are you ready to rock, my friend?
Bring it on.
Dwayne, it's great to have you on the show, man. I've read some of your bio and your intro to the show here, but tell us a little bit more in your own words about, give us maybe the short version of how did you get started in music and end up with such a cool studio in Lexington, Kentucky, which I believe is called Shangri-La Studios, right?
Yeah, it was called Shangri-La, and then recently I just switched it over to the Lexington Recording Company. But
oh, cool! I like that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's pretty much an ode to the town that I've stayed in, and probably is the reason why I'm still in music. Really, I was a small town kid from Ohio, tennis player, and
Nice, man. Do
yeah,
you still have your wristbands and your headband?
got all the stuff. I don't put them on like I used to, but and I was just obsessed with music as a kid. From the Midwest. Like the classic rock thing was dominant in my upbringing, and so Zeppelin and the Stones and Van Halen and all of that stuff. And although I never really was inclined to play, my parents somewhat discouraged it, knowing my ADD was very focused on very few things. And so coming up, I was just really just more a fan. And then I got to my early 20s, and I had some friends. My ex-wife, encouraged me to start playing. And when you start playing a little bit later, you're pretty much convinced no one's going to play with you, and you don't know if you're ever going to be any good. So I got a guitar and a 4-track in the same week. And that really sort of kicked off my curiosity and my research and my, investigating as to what recording even was, like the idea of a producer or a mixer, those type of things.
How old were you at that point? So you sort of got into this later, is the way you describe it?
Yeah, I was 22 when I started playing, 22, 23, and, started with the little 4-track, and then moved to the reel-to-reel, and then the old ever popular ADAT.
Oh yeah.
And then on from there through, all the different, recording mediums that we dabble in. But I was a tennis teaching pro, and my ex-wife had been a top 20 in the world player. So we got to travel and do that, and came off the road and went right into the teaching and coaching, and the music was my, sort of side hustle, playing gigs, recording people around town. And then we sold that business, and seeing as if I'm not very good at too many things, I figured, well, the only other thing I know to do is music. And there was certainly no infrastructure here in Lexington for a recording studio, really not much in Kentucky. And so I just took, what money we had and invested it into, a console and a tape machine. And the digital thing was, the DAW scenario was becoming very much at the forefront. And, I thank goodness for that every day, because I don't think that I could have, had it been even 5 years before, I think I would have not been able to jump headfirst into it. And
what year are we talking here?
2002, 3. Yeah. So
yeah, that's really when Pro Tools was becoming kind of ubiquitous, or it was really that crossing the 2000 mark where Pro Tools became the thing that was available to sort of everybody. And I think the Digio 1 came out somewhere around there, 99 or something like that.
Yeah. I was a Pro Tools person at first, and then jumped into Nuendo, because a lot of the scoring stuff was being done in that side of things, in Cubase. And when I went into this first full time, I was really only recording bands a little bit. Mm-hmm. I was mainly making an income at licensing, score, remix, a lot of demos.
Wow.
Demoing, any sort of commercial project that was thrown my direction, which was real informative to me, because I had to figure out, how to get a tambourine to sound like a Motown tambourine, and how to get a Bonham-y sort of drum thing going on, and, all of those elements, and fit it into, the narrative of sound that I was being asked to work within. So that was very helpful for me. And not being in an industry town, I was having to, and this is almost sort of, I hate to say it, date myself, but this is really, this is pre-YouTube and all of that. So a lot of Facebook. Yeah, definitely pre-Facebook.
So it's interesting, because you remind me that, and it's different now, I imagine, but for, or maybe it's not, but for a long time, it seems like recording and music production did happen all over the country, but if it wasn't a music hub, then it was somehow related to and connected to advertising and local television and radio and things like that, right?
Yeah, a lot of that. ironically, what was happening is we were starting to get into some file sharing when I first got in, which meant that I could do demos and I could work with national advertising companies, and do that and then upload it to my server and then have that sort of exchange of information that way. So I was very much I was very fortunate that I popped in this when I did, because it allowed me to, not have to move the family, and take that level of risk, both on, geographical challenges as well as technological and gear. Things became a lot less expensive very quickly. So it allowed somebody like me to, cut their teeth and, make a lot of mistakes early on without it necessarily being a, career suicide.
Yeah, totally. Because living in Lexington, if you're not an expert at training horses, you might be you might be an outsider, right? I'm trying to think of other Lexington stuff. So for me, I did play one show in Lexington once, but it was at a private barn party or something many years ago. And then I've driven through, and stuff that I would see, there's like a church on a hill that looks like a castle or something like that, right?
Yeah.
What's that place all about? It is a castle.
It is a castle. Yeah. So, Lexington is a beautiful, well put together socioeconomic, mid-size city. And, we got the University of Kentucky here, but it's mainly bourbon, basketball, and horses. So
bourbon, basketball, and horses.
Yeah.
The two B's and an H.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I think I told you about this when we were working, but boy, if I went all the way back to 2009 or something, early YouTube, I remember stumbling on these videos of people who were taking cars and they would try and modify them to become, they would split hydrogen from water and make these not dialysis, what's it called? Well, I forgot, but they would do that. And so they'd generate hydrogen and then they'd put that back into the engine. So they were called water cars, right? And in stumbling on that, I found that there was actually a water car museum, and it was in Lexington, Kentucky. And I ordered like a Xerox book from this place. So somewhere in my studio, I've still got that book, The History of the Water Car. So I got to find it and read it sometime. But
wow. I wish we would have followed that.
You guys are doing cool stuff up there.
Yeah.
Well, right on, man. So, we can pivot away from that, but with your understanding of the, getting into this stuff with this connection to music licensing, advertising, things like that, do you feel like today that still exists in a similar way, or has that world completely changed? And do you still do some of that? There's one of the tracks in your discography, Choreo Prologue, that is sort of an instrumental, and it sounds like it might have been a soundtrack project or something. I'm guessing that might be related.
Yeah. Well, I spent the first 3 years, I have a great friend who actually, ironically, was sort of the person who taught me how to play guitar early on, who was in advertising, worked for a company down in Miami, and encouraged me to do, demos and score stuff for advertising and spend my time, working in that realm, knowing that there was at least a little bit of a cushion financially there. And then you get to about 2006, 5, 6, and the labels realize that everything has changed. Of course, they're 5 and 6 years behind the ball, but they started allowing and encouraging and actually looking to advertising and film as a means of pushing not only their revenue side of stuff, but also it allowed basically more exposure to their artist in both current and back catalog. So that took sort of guys like myself out of the game a little bit, because they had lowered their financial expectations. And so that's when I really moved on into, more producer and mix stuff in actually the traditional way with artists. But yeah, there's still quite a bit of the licensing element that is not only something that I think sort of is good financially for the artist, but it is a good exposure element, as long as that you have some sort of ethic as to what you're aligning your art with. The aforementioned choreo, that choreo is basically my name for the work that I do that is what I would consider sort of abstract. It's somewhere between the Bee Gees and Brian Eno.
Right on, right on.
And I've done some licensing with that.
Cool. Are you using Pro Tools to create stuff like that? Because it sounds like it comes from the world of samples and programmed sounds somewhat.
I'm a Nuendo guy.
Okay, you're Nuendo all around. Okay, great.
Yeah, I am. And I use everything in the kitchen sink to get that project material. So it could be found sounds, it could be samples, it could be a lot of it's me playing. And one of my favorite tools, to head to the sort of geek side of stuff is like Drumagog, drum sampling. I think to even call it drum sampling is a little bit too narrow, but I'll just beat on a chair and then trigger those different things to different sounds, from sneezes to kick drums. And I like to work very quickly on projects that I'm engineering and doing the writing on. I'm not the most patient individual in the world, and I sort of feel like that that type of project, which is very much me isolated, is an exercise in trying new things and advancing my skill sets in a very non-organic fashion that I can use when I'm working with more traditional, projects, be it a roots, indie, rock thing.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. So I'm trying to spend a lot more time in the studio creating, because I feel like every time I do that, it's giving me exponential tools to use when I work with somebody else. In fact, it sort of like clicked with me. I realized that like that waiting for the opportunity to discover new things when you're always on the clock with another artist versus just going in there, the freedom that you give yourself when you're by yourself in the studio, they can't even compete hardly.
Yeah. The thing for me too is I very much have a studio that I don't rent it out to anybody else. I do have a couple of people that I'm close to that work out of here on occasion, but it's a constant refinement in expediting. I want to be really prepared so that when I'm working with artists, that there's really no downtime. And I feel like my experiments that I'm able to explore on my own help refine that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I also am of I try to stay really naive. I don't spend much time researching what other people are doing, and I'm not a big gearhead. So I do the best.
Other than
that
listening
I
to
can.
this podcast, though, right?
You exclusively.
Listen to this podcast constantly, right?
Well, that's why I don't have to take in much outside stuff. But so the place is very much crafted around my experiments, and then being able to move fleet of foot, if you will.
Nice.
When I'm working with other artists. And of course, budgets are what they are. So I think that helps on all levels.
So you mentioned this Drumagog thing. Let's geek out on that for a sec, because that's such a cool idea. Now, there are apps like Ableton Live that have sort of built this in. I don't even know if Logic does it now, where you can kind of beatbox and just say, turn it into drums. The Drumagog thing, I'm guessing you just, you're making a sound, and then that you put the one plug-in on with the one kick drum, and that becomes the kick drum beat or something like that, right? Do you do that? Do you hear the Drumagog plug? Maybe break it down, and do you hear that sound coming out while you're tapping on a microphone or something like that? Or do you tap first and then sort of sculpt the sound after?
So I became familiar with Drumagog through just the general sonic frustrations of a mixer when I would get stuff sent to me, or I would record something and felt like maybe the initial choice further down the road wasn't exactly the sound that I would have wanted, or it needed some nourishment. So I used it in a very traditional way for a long time, which is, if I had a snare drum that needed a little extra something, I would, supplement the organic snare with a Drumagog, a parallel channel.
Yeah.
And then I started to really realize that how musical you could use it. So I would use, it became a big thing for me for a while. I was working with this great artist, Ben Sollee, who was a cello player.
Yeah.
And, sometimes Ben would be playing something very percussive with the cello, and it might be in a certain key. So I might use a particular transient or hit or approach to him hitting the cello a certain way, and I might use that to trigger something additional in his playing. Maybe it was the kick drum. And then all of a sudden I just started taking that idea, and you always sort of appeal to the laziest part of yourself. And, so I didn't even want to put a drum kit together for my own stuff. And I never wanted it to sound like drums anyways. So I would literally just sort of sit here on my desk and, hit stuff. And then I would have it trigger up these things. So I was not able to monitor what I was going to eventually hear. And quite frankly, I don't know that I would have even had the forethought to know what I wanted to hear. It just became like a poor man's, MPC.
Well, it's pretty cool because it probably opens up a different creative door. It's like writing on a new instrument. So if you're just tapping on the desk, you're creating a rhythm that sort of does something cool, and then you discover a whole new rhythm afterwards when you trigger sounds from that.
Yeah, very much so. And it also sort of allowed me to explore space. When you're working with samples, or when you're working, and it's ironic that I would say this because I'm pretty much a roots and Americana and indie guy, but I like space. I think density in tracks shouldn't be provided by track numbers. It should be bold decisions that you make with the things that you have. And something like Drumagog allowed me to, enhance what was already there, as opposed to adding more stuff to it, if that makes any sense at all. So that type of program is really beneficial towards having an expansive creative element for me to be able to use tool-wise with a pre-existing performance.
Want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on this podcast episode. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars, or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always someone in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply.app makes it easy to add collaborators to a project so that the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music. Just upload a voice memo or song and start commenting. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. Okay, so when you talk about this creating density through the bold choices you're making, as opposed to density by just layering on more overdubs, that kind of, and you're talking about, I think you're just the way you describe the technology opening up this creative space, it makes me think of like the world that plugins have created, like as instrumental options for us that didn't used to exist quite as much. So, now it's like it's a whole new world where you can play a single note, but just have this enormous reverb that goes for ages and stuff like that. What are some of the places that you find you're exploring that and really enjoying it? Is it with the Drumagog thing? Are you also getting into plugin world, or do you like to really use outboard reverbs and things like that?
It's a bit any and all. I love texture. I mean, that's really my great love is in that world. So space is probably my number one tool. The places I'm recording, I try to embrace whatever the space allows me to. I don't like, I'm not a big fan of traditional recording studios. I feel like that maybe it's a little bit intimidating in some ways. I've had the good fortune of working in some of the, the greatest studios in the country.
Like the Toy Box Studio in Nashville.
Like the Toy Box Studio in Nashville, of course. And, take your place as an example. When I was there, it was very dry. And I love dry. I love warm. I love dry. Like that's, I felt like that immediately upon, the artists I was working with, the Breedings, and in particular, Willie, had done his homework on what he and I had been really enthralled with, which was like some of the 70s warmer tones.
Yeah, it's great, great 70s vibe on that record. So Rockstars, that one is called The Breedings Fayette, and it's in the playlist too. So I encourage you to click through and listen to Dwayne's work, and you can find that there as well.
So, in looking at, exploring texture and being bold with decision making, I think the first thing that I look at is the space I'm recording at and embracing it and or antagonizing it.
Right, like space meaning the physical space. So like use the room sound of where you're recording, enhance it, don't hide it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the other thing is filtering. I became very enamored naively with the 90s Chad Blake albums, Kiko,
yeah.
Those things. I had no clue what he was doing until every once in a while he would throw out a little hint of something. And I took that, sticking microphones in buckets and, using these particular elements to create what I considered to be an interesting texture. And in particular, at a time when I didn't have the money to buy, an EMT 140 or, 5 Space Echoes or whatever, the thing was that later on, you acquire. And then the outboard thing for me is really a matter of hitting it as I'm going in and making decisions and sticking to it so that I don't have to sort of look in the rearview mirror and try and remember what it was I was going for. And a lot of that is pedals, some funky old cheap pedals, Space Echoes, copycats, these sort of things. And then the world of plugins is just, I know it's not always the sexiest subject for gearheads, but it's the single greatest thing that ever happened to me, as a mixer, to be able to flip something on its side and change the depth of field, change the texture. I love taking acoustic guitars and knocking them down an octave and oscillating them and decapitating them and then running it through the Space Echo and printing it back in and messing with it and being able to do all that in 5 minutes, is an amazing thing.
Okay. So when you're thinking about trying to capture the room too, are there any tricks that you found really effective as far as letting the sound of the space into the recording? I mean, are you putting up special room mics, or is it more like choices of larger diaphragms on acoustics so that you just hear more of the room behind the instrument, or any of that kind of stuff?
Well, I walk around, constantly walking around the place. And even in my own studio, I have a propensity to move a lot. So both in a session and I move the studio a bunch. So when I get bored, I shift. And I think that attitude has made me a very curious sort with, if I went to your place, what corner is doing what. I think that we took, I remember not being the most popular producer in that session because I
don't remember what that was.
I took the drummer and stuck him in the closet, and it was a very skilled.
Yeah, we did. I have a dead room.
Yeah.
And I loved it, man. I was so psyched when you did that, because that's why I built it. I wanted to have that 70s super dead drum sound. Yeah. And that sound ended up turning really, it was fun. We got to like gate the snare drum while it was going down. Plus, we got to use my tape machine. So we were recording to my MCI 16, JH16 analog, and that was a blast for me.
Yeah. So I the space, sometimes I feel like people, take things at face value. And in particular, over the last 10 years in this roots Americana, almost referential retro type of mentality, people have become very enamored with, okay, I'm going to go into a big room, so I'm going to have a big room sound.
Right.
I find, quite frankly, that I remember going into Ocean Way, which was a wonderful experience, 10 or 12 years ago. And the guy had played me some reference points to what the sound of the room, the big room, the church room could sound like. And the very first thing I thought of was, oh, this is an amazing opportunity to make a really super tight drum sound, because the reflections are so big and so long that I can actually just sort of squeeze the room and then use the room as an opportunity to have the players be eyeballing one another and be very intimate with each other, but the sound to be very tight. So I guess I just look at it as some sort of potential recipe. And in that case, that's what I took away from that. And, the other thing to do is, manipulating the room, knocking the hell out of it with a compression, and, destroying it with a cheap mic, and, committing to a particular sort of couple novelty things that might very well define the way that the sound of the album goes.
So when you talk about making a tight sound record in a big open space, maybe break that down a little bit more for us. Like, what does that mean when you were thinking that and then translating it to how you were going to mic things up and where you were going to put the musicians? Does that mean like it's a close mic, but it's got a lot of compression so that the room comes in through that mic, or anything like that?
Well, I just sort of take it as this: the driest place you can record is outside.
Right.
So the big rooms allow you this very reverberated type of sound, or it could indicate that you could take that, you can bring the outside in, because you can get up close with stuff, and you can even make some baffling. And so I look at a lot of times those big rooms as an opportunity to get something to encourage human interaction more so than big sound. I love it when the band's able to sort of hunker down and get around one another.
Yeah.
And then, I'll throw a couple of, mics way far away and potentially use them as like long throws. But I always found that the bigger sounds on drums I got were not from distance far away. I thought that created sort of a latency and sort of created issue with my pocket. So I tend to sort of get up on you with it, and
nice.
It's sort of sexy to have a bunch of room mics floating around and whatnot. But for the most part, even the Zeppelin stuff, which I grew up on that. I mean, there is nothing better as far as drumming is concerned, as far as my ear goes. But I don't, my experience in talking to people that, were maybe a little more on the inside of that, they weren't that far away from him.
Right.
If anything, they were on top of them.
Yeah, there's some Van Halen videos coming out now that I've been watching too. Same thing. Like, I think Van Halen was just like a couple of baffles. They were right there in the same room together.
Yeah, a foot goes a long way. If you want to get into creating a big drum sound, get a foot or two away from something. You don't have to be 20 feet away from it, because good drumming for me is all about the pocket in which the band lives and exists. And I sort of feel like a little goes a long way as far as space. And once again, the beauty of the world we live in now is, UAD and those companies have given us an infinite array of algorithmic delights with the Capitol chambers and the Ocean Way stuff. And then, the things that you can do with that, that becomes a whole other instrument.
Right. So you're saying record it close mic and dry, because you can always add more of the space in some of the, the mixing techniques. Well, so speaking of spaces, tell us more about Lexington, Kentucky Recording Company. That's the full name, like that, Lexington Recording.
The Lexington Recording Company.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Funny that you would ask, because it is sort of a castle. It's
Nice.
Right downtown. It's a multi-floored, 4,000 square foot refurbed late 1800s, castle in the middle of Lexington, Kentucky. And I spent years when I had Shangri-La, before Rick Rubin decided he would resurrect that place. That was a warehouse, and it was very big, and it was a lovely space that I felt like that I had done as much as I could in. And so I opened up another space, which was an old house. And, I always loved those, the concept, the romantic side of, the Stones and Zeppelin and U2 going to spaces and, making them their own, knowing that no one else had ever recorded there, and that you were going to have some sort of thing that was, very personal.
Yeah, like unique to that record even.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and then I moved. I was over at my last place for about 3 years, and felt like that I had, wrung out the sponge, and looked for a new spot. And I had a friend that said that I bought a space, and I know it's perfect for you. So I don't know what that says about my personality, but I moved in here about 2 years ago, and it's
and your sponge just re-expanded.
Yeah. You got a whole new.
A whole new sponge, man. That's great, man.
Yeah.
I like your analogies. You've already invested in your speakers, headphones, and the sound treatment of your studio. So you're ready to make great music, but your mixes don't seem to translate to the rest of the world when they leave the studio. The problem is that the frequency response of your room is not allowing your speakers to tell you the whole story. SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can solve this for you by calibrating your speakers and headphones EQ and balance so that you can now make better mix choices. Start with a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. The API Select T25 is a classic 2-channel FET feedback-style compressor limiter with a Class A tube output stage and custom API transformer, allowing split mono or stereo mode. Built with dual triode vacuum tubes, sidechain de-essing, detent controls for accurate recall, and API's famous thrust mode, the T25 represents a new design in tube compression. Bring the legendary sound of API to your home studio with the new Select T25 at apiaudio.com. Well, that sounds pretty exciting. Yeah, I don't know what the castle vibe is in Lexington, but clearly you guys are up to something good there. And then what about some of the tools that you still find useful? Now we're in, almost 2022. Well, when this comes out, we will be. Tools have certainly changed, but some stay the same. Which ones have you decided to continue to hold on to and use, and which maybe get retired in place of new things?
Well, I've retired what I would consider sort of nice, but no longer part of my workflow consoles. I had the Neotech that I used for years. I had a beautiful old Chilton that our mutual friend Chris Mara had provided me years ago. That was just an amazing, fuzzy, warm thing. I've got its little brother, the sidecar.
No relation to Alex Chilton?
No, unfortunately. Yeah. So, I like to keep everything usable. Part of my workflow, it's sort of like my mother used to say, well, if you got some clothes and you haven't worn it in a year, you obviously don't need those clothes anymore. So you're going to get rid of them. And that's the way I treat my gear. So I have slimmed down the amount of space that's occupied by my stuff. I like things to be very transparent. I think artists get a little intimidated if it's a big gear conversation and there's too many choices.
Right.
So,
if the giant wall of gear looks like it's about to topple over on them.
Yeah.
Playing their overdub.
Yeah. So there's a certain element that, I'm certainly as big a dork as the next guy when it comes to gear, but I chose that I was going to run this place like a business, from the artist's perspective. And so that meant, making everything functional, keep it in good shape, make it as transparent as possible. And so I got rid of my patch bays years ago. I don't use patch bays at all.
So how do you do things without patch bays?
I hardwire it for exactly what I want. So my place is put together like, say, I imagine Motown would have been put together, where there was a certain sort of way that they did the drums. I mean, they go so far as to not even moving the drums for years. But
right.
I have what I like, and I know my one or two options really, really well. And if those aren't working, then I can go to sort of my next thing. And because I have it open, one of my pet peeves was going into places and everything shoved up against the wall, so you can't see the back of the gear. So I bring my stuff out a little bit so I can access the back of it. So my patch bay still exists, but it exists in the form of me moving an XLR cable out of the back of my pre and compressor and switching over to something else, which I don't have to do very often. And, I love my APIs and my 610s and my 1176 and the usual stuff. But I really try to keep it really slim. And, I have 24 channels of things to choose from.
Nice. So your 610s, you're talking about the Spectra.
I'm using, so I have 8 LA 610s that are
LA 610s, right?
Mainly the new ones. I did have a Spectra 610 for years and got rid of it about 8 or 9 years ago. It just was getting a little, clunky. So I don't know. I really don't. One thing that always was a pet peeve of mine was when I went into a studio, whether it would be a $2,000 a day studio or a boutique studio, and we were shooting out all day long. Well, I can use this. Right. I'm no Einstein, but I can tell you, if you give me 5 mics and 5 preamps and 3 compressors, if you do the math, that's a whole lot of time I'm taking up figuring out what I'm going to use. Right. And then you invite the artist's opinion into it. And as much as respect as I give them, the reality is I need to have a really good first 3 choices so I can get them in creative and performance mode. So my favorite sort of piece of gear is microphones.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there a time that it's appropriate to invite the artist's, perspective and choice into a decision? Like, for example, if you're starting out to do vocals with an artist, does it make sense to let them hear some different mics and then pick one and then sort of take a break and come back later or anything like that?
Well, I think the artist's opinion is always the most important. I try to make it a situation to where I don't force them into having to have an opinion about it unless they don't like something that they hear. And I feel like the playback is an instantaneous reaction opportunity. If I've made a choice to, put them in front of a 44, which is real beautifully maintained 44, and run it through, a Neve into an API EQ or something like that, or a 610, which is my normal thing. I look at their face, I try and get a real quick glance as to is what the mirror reflecting back at them something that they're happy with or not. And I don't tend to ask them unless they aren't happy. I don't feel like that's a slight to them. Matter of fact, I think it's a lot of respect to their ability to perform. The more I interject gear or my opinions into that, the less I'm asking them to participate as a performer. So
good thinking.
I try to go, I try to figure that I've got my skills to a particular place to where they're presentable and will be an honest reflection of the performance that they've given me. And then we can have a discussion about it if they're not happy with it.
Yeah, it's funny. As an engineer, I can find myself in the control room listening to a guitar sound come through a pair of speakers and think all these thoughts about how I should adjust the mic, move it this way, that way. Maybe a different mic would be the choice. But as a guitar player, I listen to a guitar sound coming into my headphones when I'm getting started. And all I think about is turning the amps up or down, changing the pedals, playing the guitar differently. And inevitably I always get something I'm looking for that way. So it's like, it doesn't, who gives a shit what it's a 57 on the amp or whatever. And with a vocal even, there's times where I'll hear a voice on an SM7 and think, that's just not really doing it, until I just compress it right, or, just make it hot and loud and proud or something. And all of a sudden it's great.
Yeah. I think that there's not that many microphones. There's not that many preamps. I mean, you got tube, you got ribbon, you got, dynamic, you got condenser.
Yeah.
And then you go into the control room, you got a few things. And how somebody, and there's some amazing engineers out there that can make a choice from 75 different things and get it. I have the utmost respect for that. But that's not the headspace that I live in. I try and have really good gear that I can move really quickly on. And like I said, if the artist isn't happy with it, or they feel like that maybe they're curious, then we can have a little bit of fun. We can go on a little bit of a search. But I tend to think that most of the time with artists, the gear conversation happens leading up, and it used to happen a lot, leading up to the session. And then by 3 hours into it, you never talk about it ever again.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
focused on just performing. What's coming out of their mouth is more important than the mic it's going into.
Yeah.
So doing the Breedings record was really fun. I'm also remembering the way we set them up for singing. Willie and Aaron, his sister Aaron, they were both singing together, singing a lot of harmonies, and we had them sitting face to face upstairs in the loft with a pair of SM7s and acoustic guitars, and they just sort of could look at each other and play. I guess they did have to have headphones for the drums, but that's something else that we might want to talk about is just, the other sessions I've seen, maybe, gosh, what did I see? Maybe it was this video you have with the Vandaveers where they're singing and nobody's wearing headphones. So that brings up the question, Dwayne, to headphone or not to headphone?
I think that I headphone quite a bit. I like to use the control room a lot though. And bleed is nothing to me. I don't care. It's just not an issue unless I feel like it is taking away, if it's, a distraction to the performer, with too much bleed, too much information, then then I'll, sort of confine things in a certain manner. But I tend to headphone. I think people in 2022 are very, very comfortable in the recording studio, even more so than when you and I worked together. It's only been 9 years. That there was a little bit more mystery to it all. I love, I love the performance aspect of artists coming in, and I know a lot of engineers really hate when they the artists are recordists on their own. I think it's the greatest thing ever, because we don't have to have those conversations anymore. We can get right down to the music. And so the headphone situation is generally an extension of their previous experiences before they get to me. So if they're used to singing in front of their monitors or a wedge or anything like that, I love those, albums that, U2 did with, Eno and Dan Lanois and Flood and those guys, where it was a 58 in front of a wedge. There's 1,000 different ways to record. And I think each one of those things from the producer engineer side creates a sonic opportunity. And the most important thing is that the artist is comfortable. So whatever you need from me.
Well, that's cool, man. Let's talk about the wedge thing for just a sec. Are there any things that we're going to discover if we decide to try that out? Let's say we're doing this, we're like, oh, let's try recording with the wedges live for the first time. That would be, we're describing something that is familiar to the band in the rehearsal space typically, right? So what would be a way to approach that if we're going to record that too? Would the wedge be down on the floor? Would we get it up closer to the vocalist? Would we be concerned about the wedge being near the drums? What do we put mics on? What do we not need to put a mic on?
Yeah. The miking is the number one thing. Making sure that you've made mic choices that take into consideration that you're using a live monitoring scenario. Essentially we're talking about a PA, which is like recording at a wonderful theater or a beautiful club or a big room. So you're setting it up in a matter of, it's almost like not what you're recording, it's what you're not recording. So thank goodness for Shure and those type of companies that have made these amazing, affordable microphones that are picking up only the information that you're directionally giving it. I do tend to think that the mic choice is the number one element that might be a different variable. If you're recording with a PA wedge or monitoring system, and certainly that can be different from player to player too. The drummer might like it, and yet the singer might not. And then
right, you remind us you probably need a wedge near the drummer.
Yeah,
just like a live stage.
I think that there's certain guys that do that really well, producers that I, was fans of or engineers of, especially in the 90s. You had Brendan O'Brien, I know, did that quite a bit. But I tend to think that my first go-to is headphones or you in the control room where I have a nice set of opportunity to pick and choose what type of monitoring system we're going to use. But I'm not beyond taking, a single monitor and like a control room monitor with maybe a 5 or a 7 or something and throwing it out at a level that's responsible, distance from the artist where they can hear it, where they feel like they're singing at home.
Right. So we're talking about in the control room, the speaker is on, but the singer is in the control room right there too. And are you saying maybe we even mute one of our studio monitors so that there's just a single studio monitor playing the music?
It could be that, or it could be the opposite. Maybe I turn on everything in the control room so that they sort of feel like they're in a stereo situation. When I grew fond of recording myself, when I first started, this dates me a little bit, but Tom Scholz had the Rockman, the box.
Yeah, totally.
And there was nothing like turning on, plugging into the Rockman and then putting it into your stereo receiver. And all of a sudden you were Boston or Def Leppard or whatever the flavor of the moment was. And
don't forget Rat, man. Don't forget Rat.
Warren DeMartini there. So those type of environments is where we spend most of our time in rehearsal. If I'm working with a band, I'm trying to get them to feel like they're at rehearsal. There's no need for me to stick them in a situation. And this is just me. Other people have had successes 1,000 different ways, but I don't necessarily find it conducive to sticking a bunch of people in a bunch of different rooms and then throwing them TV monitors or a control room talkback as my primary go-to, unless that the texture or the performances are being enhanced by that type of environment. Then you adapt to that. But I do like the players, if at all possible, to eyeball each other because that's the way they do it. It lets them see. I don't even talk through a talkback here at the studio a lot of times. I have the rooms closed off if I want them, but I usually leave the areas open. I feel like that when I talk to somebody and when players in the band talk to one another, there's a particular comfort level that goes with an eye-to-eye interaction and the way your body moves when you talk to somebody. And, bands they're like family, if they misunderstand each other too early in the process, they start to lose confidence and then it could break out into a little bit of a rumble. And I'm trying to avoid that, so, yeah.
So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you on Instagram about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version are they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or a computer back in the studio. All mix comments comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more mixed-up mix messages from the band. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music, and it all works in your browser with no downloads required. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with a set-it-and-forget-it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Duane Lundy, joining us from Lexington Recording Company. We're going to dig more into recording probably mostly bands live, musicians playing together. So Duane, are you going to be, are you ready to jam? That's what I mean to say.
Of course, always.
All right, sweet, man. I really like hearing you talk about this idea. You can stop me if I'm going too far with it, but of singing in the control room a bit. And I wonder if we want to break that down just a little bit more for the rock stars. So for example, is it okay to sing in the control room? Do we want to be thinking a dynamic mic if we're going to do that? Is it okay with a condenser mic? Is it, do we need to think about a figure 8 where the side is pointed towards the studio speaker? And would this work for layering harmonies, for example, or is it a little more appropriate because of bleed onto the microphone for, just the single lead vocal, that kind of thing?
Well, to be honest with you, a majority of the time that they're in the control room with me, we're still under headphones. So I would say that makes up a great deal of the sonic question asked. And the reason I do that is to have conversations, to be able to move quickly, to have a particular opportunity to encourage or champion a performance. If I'm having them do it through the monitors and that's how they're comfortable, a lot of times, I know Glenn Johns has his method as to how to, do that to sort of null out particular bleeds and phasing issues. I tend to put them in a place and listen real quick and play back to something that has a nice sort of atmosphere and space to it. If it's a rock track, I'm less precious about it. I might just stick a 58 on them and let them go. Mm-hmm. Or in cahoots with another microphone, probably an 87, or a 67 or a copy.
So you mean like double miking the vocal?
Just to be able to get a little bit of sense of space and then get that proximity effect, that real close.
So tell us what we need to know about successfully pulling off a double mic. Anything to be aware of?
If the guy or gal is in particularly aerobically ambitious, the second mic is nice. Almost like an atmospheric or environmental pickup. I'm not expecting it to have full and utter, translation. I'm really relying on the dynamic mic.
Are the capsules lined up side by side kind of thing?
I'll put the 87 or the 67 in a manner in which they think they're going to sing into it like they would in a traditional fashion, and then I hand them the 58 or the Unidyne or the Beyer or whatever, and then they start moving around. Because that's that type of thing. Now, if I'm in a singer-songwriter session, then I have them right behind me, and I have a little bit of monitoring going on. And I tell you what I do like to do a lot is use the monitor as an echo chamber. So they're not really that concerned with monitoring themselves, but I'm kicking back like a heavily affected sound that's coming back into the room with them. So they feel like they're almost like in a chamber situation that I've created with the monitors. I know that, there's certain places like Sound Emporium, I know, sort of notorious for throwing the singer in between the doorway of the chamber and then the live room. I guess cool. That it's a little like that. You're creating sort of a surrealist sense of space that they can sort of live in. I do, as you mentioned, I love to do backup vocals in the control room,
Well, I always love
great.
The discovery process for backup vocals in the control room. When somebody's like, oh, we should try some harmonies, I find it's 1,000 times more effective to have people come right into the control room. Let's sing some lines. We're looking at each other. We're exploring a melody right there with the speakers going. It's just easier. It's like you trust the way your voice blends into the speaker more readily. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they go out to the mic. Now, of course, the big risk is as soon as they leave the control room and go to the mic, they can't remember what the hell they just sang. So then sometimes you're like trying to write it down on a keyboard or something. But yeah, keep going on that. How do you like to do the backgrounds in the control room?
I'll put a 44. If it's two vocals, I'll put a 44, two vocalist. I'll put a 44, pointed, not at the speakers, but
there we are, punching the mic, just punching. Yeah, I like how you're so bold. You just punch your microphones in the studio.
I'll have them, facing one another behind me with the mic pointed away from the monitors. And of course, with a 44, you're in a figure 8 pattern, and let them just sort of go at it, because the most important thing is the relationship with them. And then I'll control the volume accordingly. It might be through the control room speakers at a particular level of anything from really loud to just enough so they can hear themselves. It might be a one ear off type of situation with the headphones. It could be any number of things.
So that's actually similar to what the Beatles did, I believe, at Abbey Road. Mm-hmm. They had something called the White Elephants, I think, where these tall speakers that they would roll in to the live room, and then they just set up a figure 8 mic in front of it, where the side of the mic, Rockstars, if you need to picture it, a figure 8 is a ribbon is a figure 8 pickup pattern. It's picking up in front of the mic and behind it. So Rockstars, if you put the speaker pointing in towards the side of the mic, it's going to hear almost nothing from the speaker, but the musicians standing on either side of the mic can hear it, right?
Yeah. And, one of the beautiful things about that is, and in particular in today's, technology, makes the editorial side of stuff when they're not singing so easy for us, as opposed to, gating and whatnot, which is essentially what it is. We're just cutting out where they're not singing. I love to, even overcompress that a little bit and have them, find a nice area of distance off the mic. So when they do pop in, then not only am I getting their performance vocally, but I'm getting the room. It's almost like an aural exciter. So it just, everything sort of bumps. And so that can be fun. But, there's 1,000 different options in a bunch of different ways to do it. But I'm trying to react primarily on comfort level of the artist. And when you send them into the other room, you don't know what's going to happen as much, and I tend to feel like they feel a little bit more red light syndrome that way.
Yeah, that's true. I totally agree with you on that. And I think that's one of the big tricks for us as engineers and producers, is to just let everybody play without being aware of the go factor,
Yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, like I have interns in my studio, and when I get to go play, I'll give them a chance to be in the hot seat and on the talkback and everything. And the first thing that they're likely to do is go, okay, everybody, are you ready? Here we go. We're rolling, and then it's just like, you just feel it as a musician. You're like, oh boy, now I'm thinking about that,
Absolutely. It's one of the things I like about, there's always a yin and yang to the digital versus tape and the live versus a composite recording style, whatever that is. But one of the great benefits to the technology of the moment is there really is never an on or off, and I love the ability to archive the way we're able to at this juncture, because there's, we're capturing performance I just am always recording. It just never stops. Soon as they go in there, I'm starting to record, because it could be anything from a conversation to a particular inspired live take that they didn't even know that they were on, to an ambient tone that can be used in between songs. It's just, it's space is cheap these days.
So you like to think about, if you've got a song and you got the multi-tracks in your session, you like to think about it like one long stretch of tape. You just press go and each take happens when it happens. I guess if you have a click, you just sort of turn the click on and keep rolling, as opposed to playlisting where you start at the beginning of the song and hit end and it's not recording in the in-between times.
Yeah, I never do that. I'm always recording in across the timeline fashion.
Like left to right, yeah.
Left to right, whether I'm on a click or not. I can, I'm very lucky at this point in my career that I get to work with a lot of really good musicians. And so if they're a beat, if we're not on a click and you're a couple of BPMs off or whatever, I don't care. Does it feel good? Does it sound good? And I can take 5 and splice the bridge from take 5 into take 1, and then the outro chorus to take 3 on no click, eyeball that in from the time that they have finished the last take and put their instruments down, and the time they walk in to, BS around and, do their thing. I'm already edited. It's edited.
Yeah.
I've taken the notes. I've done the thing. So I don't want them to have to think about it at all. And then if they're curious of something else, then we'll do it. We'll
now when you're editing, of course, you're not rolling tape anymore. You can't be recording and editing at the same time unless you, I don't know, come up with a very clever double system or something like that. But the cool thing about rolling tape all the time is you do get those little accidents. Somebody plays a little riff, or they say something.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you don't really have to, we don't have to think about it like you're somehow supposed to know every moment of everything that ever happened and address them all. That'd be like shooting out every microphone in the studio. It's more like, if you heard something that you dig, Dwayne, as a producer, there it is, and you've got it, as opposed to asking somebody, hey, what was that thing you just did?
Yeah, I find that my task as a producer, which I produce I'm producing 90% of the stuff that I'm tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And I mix more than I actually produce these days, but let's just say that I'm producing. It's a bit understood that they're going to rely on me to make some instinctual decisions as if I was a member of the band. So
right.
if I hear something, I make a quick note from take to take to take. We keep moving. And then I try and, I guess a cliche Dwayne statement would be, why don't you take 5 and clean your ears out, or clear your head and go outside. So by the time they come back in, I've taken my notes and I've compiled that into a comp, and they listen to that. And I just think that there's a level of trust that you establish. And rarely are they curious about listening to all the takes. This is a an ADD world that we're living in. And I find that the artists are really interested in that collaboration with the person who has control of the editorial side. And if they hear something that they don't like, then you go back into the well and try and find some other stuff. But I really don't like to have them listening to 10 different takes. I think the fatigue value is really high.
Yeah. It's very little, you get very little value compared to what you are destroying in the session that way.
Yeah.
If I'm going to comp vocals, I sort of encourage people to go do something else and come back, because like the same thing. It's like, don't want the singer. I mean, sometimes the singer wants to be, and if they insist on it, that's fine. They're welcome to. But they're just all they're gonna hear is everything that didn't work about their singing if they hear you comp the vocal as an engineer.
Yeah, definitely. And when I remember working with you as an example, because I don't have an engineer that I work with a lot. I do a lot of that myself. And when I'm working with a really skilled, enthusiastic engineer who knows their room and stuff, let them do their thing. That's why we're here. And it's the same way with you hire a session person to come in and play, or a composer or whatever. Let them do their thing, and then have that relationship be. It's not a quiz. I'm not trying to test you. I want to collaborate with you, and I think that musicians, are very. I find them to be very trusting. I don't find them to be hard at all, and very focused. And but you can't ask somebody to focus all the time. And the studio is an exhausting place to be if for 8 or 10 hours.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, I learn that lesson every time I go out and play myself. I mean, actually, to be honest, I've had a few guests come on and start talking about tinnitus a little bit on the show, and I was really reminded that on my last session, that the difference between what I'm used to as far as controlling my volume and my energy experience in the control room versus going out and playing and putting headphones on, it's tricky. And it's hard to go out and play instruments with emotion and feeling and keep the headphones down at a level that is really safe for the amount of time. And I'm much more inclined to, I know I sort of pivoted here, but I'm much more inclined to get lost. So I'll get lost in the search of the take and the performance. And then I'll sort of come to at the end of that and realize, oh shit, my headphones were loud for a long time because I was lost in it. It's easier to control that in the control room. So I think it's good for us as engineers to remember that about the musicians who are coming in off the floor to listen or to take a break or to answer a question or whatever, in the way that you're talking about.
Speaking of headphones, and I know this subject, it can, be pretty expansive. I don't have many monitoring options for musicians. I keep it to 2, and I do the mixing. And if they have a request, you can micromanage it a little bit, and they're very happy very quickly. I found that in working with, I love rhythm and I love a pocket. And when I spent a lot of time in other people's studios and there was 5, 8 different options for headphone mixes, and then I would go around while everybody was, having a cigarette or eating lunch or whatever it might be. And then I would listen to their headphone mix. I found very quickly what they were listening to was themselves.
Right.
And, so that made the playback experience different. And so once again, I'm always trying to figure out a way to make everybody on the same page and create a particular vibe. So I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit controlling in that particular aspect of not sending too many options out.
Well, I did the Bonnaroo Hey Bale backstage studios for 15 years. And in that scenario, the band would all be in one room together with headphones going. Not always, but a lot of times, because, the vocal, if it was sort of a rock thing, then the vocal needed to come through. And then that would all come into me and I would mix that live on a console. And that was it. That was the headphone mix. And it would go back out to them. And what I discovered in that process that was really exciting was the feedback loop that happens when you work that way, that what they were performing informed the decisions I made about the mix, and even bringing the delays and reverbs up and, working it in real time. And that all those things that I was doing informed their playing. And so, like you say, it becomes this, trusted feedback loop that can be really cool. I don't really try and recreate that quite in the same way in a Pro Tools session, because it's a little more, unfortunately with DAWs, it's a little more hands-off the faders. Whereas on consoles, you just grab something and go. So I don't know, maybe that's the future of where we need to go with this stuff too, is try and recreate that feedback loop, even though we're in recording in computers.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like going to a dance club and everybody has their own headphones on. It's like, are they really going to interact with one another in the same manner? So
you mean like the silent disco? Like they had that at Bonnaroo.
Did they really?
Yeah. You put on headphones and it was it was kind of a cool concept, except that the music really doesn't sound the same in headphones. It's it's not the bass.
Yeah. And the human interaction. It's totally different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't ever forget one of the reasons why we go to a club or a place is that interaction.
Dude, yeah, what are the reasons you go out? You go out clubbing every night, Dwayne?
Oh, yeah, all the time, especially last year.
OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini, and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries at my studio, and it works great. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. 50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Comp Limiter. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Comp Limiter, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. Great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Arden, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. So a lot of the artists that you work with, you mentioned sort of Americana as a genre. That means we've got acoustic guitars, banjos, cello, fiddle, things like that. You've done a great job and done a lot of work recording acoustic guitars. Talk a little bit about that. What are some ways that you might start? If you were just going to go set up a mic now and you weren't even sure who was going to come play guitar yet, what would be a good general starting choice? And then what are some unusual ways to record the acoustic that might be worth exploring?
If I'm recording a artist that is singing at the same time, that changes quite a bit of my decision making. So if I'm doing a singer-songwriter, almost always my two decisions, things I'm going to go to are a 67, whether it's a real 67. I love the Mojave as a copy.
And that's for the guitar or for the voice? For
the guitar, yeah. And I will put that, and if you want to get real techie with it, I will put that where it's looks flat at the fretboard around the 12th fret, and then I'll just slightly skew it down so it's not catching much of the vocal.
Okay, so it's pointing down towards the bottom of the guitar a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll come up just slightly over the fretboard and then point it down a little bit so it's not catching much of the vocal. And then then I'll put an 87 or an SM7.
And that U67 was in cardioid potentially, or figure eight?
It's definitely in cardioid, yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll put an SM7 or an 87, and then put it in a manner that is more up towards their mouth. So the mics are sort of going in slightly opposite directions. And then just check, and I always listen in mono. I never listen in stereo when I'm doing this. I just flip my console monitoring situation to mono, and that's how I'm spending a majority of my day when I'm recording singer-songwriter, vocal and acoustic playing at the same time. And then I put a 44 in about 5 feet in front of the performer. And then sometimes I'll put two 87s winged out. And then so now I've got it's not really a decca tree, but it's sort of that mentality. So I've got a stereo 87s and a 44 ribbon out in front, and then I've got the vocal, and then I've got the acoustic, and it's a beautiful room sound, and then I can mess with that accordingly.
That's cool. And Rockstars, you can't see Dwayne as he's explaining this. I can. And when he's talking about the winged out 87s, he's basically forming the victory pose, Rockstars, because that's how good it all sounds.
I like the way that sounds. And it allows me to, and then the temperament of the vocal will dictate the amount of distance of those room mics to the performer. If I'm doing, I love recording acoustic guitar, so I could go on for days about this. That and drums are my two favorite
And you
things.
play acoustic guitar yourself, right?
I do.
Do you play a little bit of everything, or are you sort of primary on a certain instrument?
I guess I play a little bit of everything. My favorite thing to play is guitar. That's what I came up on, and my main favorite thing to play is the telephone of me calling somebody else to come in and play, because I like to be the pragmatic person watching it and sort of guide that. So,
but I mean, when you're playing an instrument, have you found that it's very effective to set things up so that it feels great for you as the player, and then if you turn that over to a musician, 9 times out of 10, that turns out to be the appropriate setting for them as well?
I think so. Yeah. I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of really great singer-songwriters, which has allowed me a lot of time to experiment with them and figure out the best manner to emotionally, not to get too foo-foo about it, but how can I emotionally connect the sound with the narrative? Joe Pug, who is just an absolute brilliant songwriter.
Yeah.
I did an album with Joe a few years ago, and we spent a couple of days. He had allotted a nice amount of time for us to work, and so we spent a few hours experimenting with depth of field, intimacy, texture. And then once we committed to that, so that was a pretty extensive miking scenario. And I think at the end of all of it, it was still pretty much a 44 on the vocal with a 67 or a Josephson, one of the two that I had going on the guitar.
So I want to qualify that because, we had talked earlier about not, when is it appropriate to include the artist, and, when are you given too many choices? So what you just described, I'll share this for everybody, Rockstars, that strikes me less as making the artist do some engineering stuff and more as beginning a creative process and saying, hey, we're going to sort of we're going to discover what your creative instruments are, your palette for sounds, and arriving at that, which I think is really cool, because I think as an artist, you want to know, what instrument am I playing? What does it sound like, and how should I play it? And so I think that's a cool way to start a process.
Yeah, I think that the main thing with that was that Joe had a specific idea in mind as to how things might sound, but wasn't completely clear as to how to get there. And so hence the reason for me putting a lot of, lenses on the picture for him. And it was really important for him to forget that as quickly as possible. I wanted him to get to the words. And so in that case, that's the reason why we spent that experimental time. That's the setup. It was the setup, and also just him getting comfortable. It was that way with just across the board on that session. Everything was about, sticking your big toe in the water, feeling comfortable. So we spent as much time figuring out the kitchen as we did the microphones. And then when I'm recording acoustic guitar without the vocal as a part of the performance, I don't know if this is unusual or not, but this is the way I do it. I put a 87 in a 67, or maybe instead of the 67, a ribbon. And I put them right there at that 12th fretish together, facing the source, facing the guitar, but I put them head to head. And honestly, Lidge, you could call it's sort of pseudo stereo. It's just two microphones right next to each other that if I can blend them in mono and go for darkness versus brightness, transparency versus density. With the representation of the mics, the 67 or the ribbon is going to be more saturated and darker. The 87 is going to be more articulated and brighter. And I can get a blend to taste and mono, or I can split them out wide, or I can morph one of them. There's any number of things I can do, or I can disregard one of them. And, or I might even bring one of them in on the chorus and get rid of it on the verse.
Oh, cool.
I love that. And phasing is just, that's our enemy most of the time.
It's our friend, man. Come on.
It's our friend. Yes. I need to be more mindful. But that eliminates that completely. So I've got that there. And, I love that sound.
Yeah, well,
and I don't like a real broad.
I've done a little bit of double miking on acoustic, and I was really struck by how effective that is. Like a U67 and a small diaphragm head to head. It's the same thing. It's the contrast in colors and being able to put together, or even like a 57 and a U67, where you've got that sort of mid-range crunch. And it's very fun. I don't always do it because we're lazy as engineers sometimes, and it's like, or we don't want to slow up the process, move quickly. Yeah. But it is a really encouraging thing. And I love what you suggested, which is the first time I've heard that, which is save one of those mics for the chorus. So you've got like a guitar, something that works on the down section, but then the brighter, strummier thing, perhaps, just brings in the shine.
One thing for me that I do almost every session anymore, if the guitar will allow. If it's not an option, that's fine. But I'll throw a DI. I'll come out of the guitar to a DI, or I'll throw it off to an amp. I have a beautiful old Maestro amp here that if you turn the volume completely off and then you turn the reverb completely up and then you mic that with the reverb,
right?
It's only reverb.
Yeah.
And then
you mic that you put out back as a room mic.
I do it. Put it
so you don't go
mic.
Close mic on the amp.
No, I'll do that a bit of a distance, or I'll run it to a DI. I love, I'm a big fan of, you and I have this in common because I know you worked on this album, but like Wrecking Ball, that stuff where, I'll take a DI'd acoustic signal, pitch it down an octave, and then run it through some, if it's a plugin, maybe an H4.
Just for clarity's sake, I worked the phones on that album and the front door of the studio.
Yeah.
But I did get to go in, when they would take breaks and check it all out. And I could go in. In fact, I was able to go in and play back the pre-delay 1/4 and 1/2 tape that was feeding the plate reverb, so I could hear what they were sending to the reverb and stuff like that. And it was really cool.
I just love that stuff. I like a slightly surrealist vision of organic music. So, there's a lot of stuff you can do with that DI'd signal to enhance. I mean, you can just take it if you just want more low end. You can run it through a low ender, shave off all of the, from everything from say 200 up, and then run it through that, modulate it, tremolo it, whatever. And all of a sudden you've just create a little David Lynch moment for yourself.
Oh man, we just started watching Twin Peaks. I got my girl, she'd never seen it, so we're watching it from the original. It's great.
That's magnificent.
So that record, Wrecking Ball Rockstars, if you're not familiar with it, Emmylou Harris, great with Daniel Lanois producing it, which harkens back to my internship at Woodland Studios in the mid-90s. But that does bring us to the topic of working with legacy artists. Dwayne, you had a chance to make wonderful Ringo Starr record, Give More Love. What did you learn working with Ringo Starr? Just tell us the story about that, man.
I mean, it's a very sort of hands-off, naive moment that happened where I had worked with Vandaveers on many albums, and they had a friend who was helping Ringo's birthday party out at Hollywood near Capitol, and they went out there and played, and Ringo took a liking to the band and to their albums, and he was working on a new effort. And she had called us up and asked if we might be interested in taking the approach of making, songs and records the way that we do to a couple of his catalog tracks, some of his more popular tracks. And we stepped in it pretty confidently and fun. And I think my time in doing score work and commercial stuff actually helped, because a lot of times in those moments you fail if you try to emulate somebody else too much. You just have to go into it and try and bring your particular skill set and taste into something. And then if they end up not liking it, that's okay, because you don't have to second guess yourself whether you put your best foot forward. And that's what we did. We went into the studio and per some light instruction from Ringo and his people, and we did the tracks and sent them out there. And then, the always nervous period between sending stuff off and hearing back. And we heard within, a few days, weeks, that there was some potential liking of what had happened. And then I got the call to send the multi-tracks. So I produced those and engineered those songs. And then the band, we just did it in a real fun sort of spirit. And then I got the call probably about 2 months after that to send the multi-tracks, and then talk to the engineer, and that he had, enjoyed some of the tones and prints and whatnot. So I sent him my prints, the reverbs and delays and so on and so forth. And I think that it was, the guy did a really good job of mixing it and stayed true to what we sent him. And then, when you hear Ringo singing on your stuff, it's just, it's weird and awesome.
So Ringo, come on, Ringo, you should have gone to Lexington. Did you forget to tell him that there was a castle waiting for him there?
Yeah, this is
multiple
pre-castle,
castles.
So maybe. Yeah, yeah. So it brings me to the subject too of, the surviving over the last 18 months in this, situation that we've been in was really not that different for me, because the process of doing work from, with artists and engineers and producers and musicians from other places was very similar to what I've been doing before. So the Ringo experience, in a lot of ways was a very normal part of the way that I've been working for years.
Yeah, somebody shared a picture early on in 2020 or something where it was it was two pictures side by side, and it was a picture of an engineer sitting at a console looking at the speakers, and it said pre-2020, and then there was a picture of an engineer staring at a console and at the speakers, the exact same picture, and it just said 2020. It's
yeah, for better or worse.
Pre-lockdown, during lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so that's cool, man. And I bet that felt great to hear Ringo coming out of your pair of speakers in the studio.
It was weird. It was great. Yeah. Yeah.
Right on. Okay, so that does bring up a question that I had. You're talking about printing the delays and the reverb and stuff. And one of the things that I've heard, whether it was the Breedings record or Ringo or some of the others, is you have a great sense of just the right sort of slapback echo for a voice. Talk a little bit about how you like to create echoes for a vocal. How do you know and feel like it's the right kind of echo? What are some things that tend to work?
My vocal chain effects wise is sort of ridiculous. It's a lot to get a little. And so a typical chain for me, and obviously it's different from album to album or even song to song, but a typical thing would be I'll do an 1176 into some EQ into an LA2A type of thing and get control of the transients and dynamics of it and automate that. And then once I've got a nice comp and sort of feeling of dynamic, commonly, I'll send off to my space echo twice. I'll send it to one length, and then I'll just twitch it a little bit and send it to another and send it hard right and left, and then mult those two together and compress and distort and EQ and reverberate those signals, and then I'm bringing my dry main vocal and melting, putting those together, gluing those together with my prints. And then I'm then adding whatever sort of effects to the individual initial comp track. And then I might even do more to the bus. And I just keep tweaking. But I do print at least, 2 different prints, hard right and hard left, to create some sense of ambience, whether it's a like sort of a long, ridiculous type of effect, like a spectry type of thing, or a quick slap. And
it's useful going out of the computer to do some of that by hitting the Roland Space Echo is a good way to sort of create an analog version of something that's unique, something that could only have happened one time.
Yeah, just shapes time. It switches time. And I might do it to, just a pedal or some other piece of gear. But
this happens at the mix stage.
It does. It happens right as I'm what I would consider starting to mix.
Okay, cool. So you do it at the beginning of your mix of that song, which I think is cool because, I don't know, I feel like if you wait till the end, you either might already feel a little impatient about the mix, or you feel like you're too worried about stepping on something you'd worked so hard on in mixing. Whereas if you start at the beginning and you create this extra sound, it's like you're almost giving yourself permission to still be in the overdub process for a moment.
Yeah. And I also sort of feel like that I work around the vocal. I mean, it's vocal all the time. It's always on. I don't know if this is where this came from, but, my situation with vocals is very, I'm very intimidated by a vocal. So I leave it on, affected, maybe 3 to 5 decibels too loud the entire time I'm mixing. And then get the other elements where I'm pretty happy. I almost never solo. I not unless I'm really tweaking something real hard, like giving a character to a kick drum, distorting a kick drum, or messing with a delay or something on a guitar. And that vocal stays in the entire time. And then I flip to mono, maybe about 80% of the way through a mix, 90% of the way through. And in mono, I seat the vocal down in, and then I flip it back, and then I sort of think I'm there. And now I can start my rides and dynamically messing with things a little bit more. But if I leave the vocal out, I'm making an instrumental album. That's not good because,
So you found that by keeping the vocal up loud and proud while you're working, it's like you're leaving yourself more room for it to be about that, or more headroom even in the mix.
Yeah. And then when I seat the vocal down in, and it seems pretty good, I might even go down a little lower and then hit like 1K, 1.5, 7, wherever. And I'll just mess with my EQing a little bit just to give it that little bump, to get up above. And about 80% of the time that works. But maybe it's just volume, And my delays and stuff, I shave off all the highs. Like those prints and my reverbs, I don't really live much above 5 to 7K on any effect.
Interesting. Oh, very cool, man. It's always cool to hear stuff like that. And then where and how do you do the shaving off as far as effects go?
Right at the very end. Right.
At the end. So the effect gets creative, and then there's a plug-in, an EQ, and it just gets resculpted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And sometimes I'll take those prints and run it to a bus so I can maybe over crank them, do something unique with it, but not a lot of times. It's about 70-30, whether that the prints live on the vocal bus or they live on a separate bus.
Hey, Dwayne. I just wanted to see if you'd be intimidated by my vocal right there.
Always.
All right. Awesome, dude. And then, Ian No, that was another great sounding record. I made a note that the reverb was super cool on that. Maybe I'm asking the same question again here, or I don't know if you want to say other things about reverb at all. Is that also, would a spring reverb sound be coming from your Roland Space Echo as well?
If it worked, I might use it, but the springs never worked on my Space Echoes. So I've never used those. The Ian album or EP was, I worked with him on a lot of songs, and those were the tunes that I existed with at the end. And a lot of the reverb on that was done on those winged out 87s on the acoustic
cool.
track or the live track. I would run those through whatever. My old house that I was doing stuff with had a beautiful bathroom. And it was like one of those tile bathrooms, plaster ceiling and walls, and it was slightly like it was rectangular, but it was slight offsets. And I had an old Yamaha keyboard cabinet that just had a great sound, and I ran everything through that thing and then a 44. So that was my poor man's version of an Abbey Road or whatever, echo
cool.
chamber. And so a lot of stuff run through that. And I had Leslie a lot of stuff through that too.
I got to work at Sunset Sound, and I guess it was Studio B, I think, or something like that, or maybe it was A. The smaller room had this incredible echo chamber, and if I recall, they had the speaker in there, and they just had a pair of beautiful 44s set up in the echo chamber. It just was like, whoa, everything sounded great.
Yeah.
I think my tambourine track that I played through the echo chamber made it onto the final cut of the record or something too. So,
tell us what record that was? Or that
it was a band called The Living Things.
Oh yeah.
And we did a song. I think we were working on Bomb 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 there, and I got to do some like go-go bells and tambourine stuff and some marimba too as a player. I was also co-producing and engineering and all that stuff. The API Select T12 is a 2-channel, all-tube Class A microphone preamp designed with API's proprietary AP2516 transformer on the input stage and a custom API transformer on the output stage. Built with the 12 AT7WC and 12 BH7 dual triode vacuum tubes, the T12 represents a new and exciting variation on API's classic preamp technology and provides you with unique tonal options for your studio, handling a wide range of recording applications, including stereo operation. Carefully engineered to provide classic tube performance and sound, the T12 brings you API's famous warmth, punch, and clarity in a new design, including a 5-year warranty. Check out the new T12 tube mic pre and T25 tube compressor at apiaudio.com. The first rule of mixing is make good mix choices. To do that, you need to be able to hear your music clearly and accurately. Can you imagine trying to paint a masterpiece while wearing rose-colored glasses, or choosing spices for a new recipe with no sense of taste or smell? You would blindly guess with every brushstroke, or think that your cooking is amazing when actually it's terrible. That's how it feels to mix when the frequency response of your room is impacting the sound of your music. Even after you carefully position your speakers and sound treat your room, you're probably not getting an accurate sound at your mix position. The frequencies in your room can have huge peaks and valleys that are completely screwing up your perspective. This is where SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can help you with the affordable solution for calibrating EQ and balance of your speakers and headphones to give you an accurate flat frequency response. By helping you to hear your music clearly, you can now start to get your mixes right. Get a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. So also another album you did, I love talking about drums anyway, so we can always pivot back to this, but you did Jocelyn and the Sweet Compression, which was some killer disco. Disco. So a couple of questions about that. What went into that production? How could we best record a powerful vocal like that if we come across a singer like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's first and foremost, that's her. She's, that's like the skies open up and deliver you a vocalist like that. It's your job to stay out of the way. That's a 44. I use a 44 a lot.
Nice.
I know some people think that's sort of aggressive. I don't know. I mean, it's a great sounding microphone, and its character is dependent. I think it picks up a beautiful vocal, cuts the transients off nice, so it's not too bright.
Work for Sinatra.
Yeah, right. And it looks good. I do the biggest decision I make with a 44 with somebody like Jocelyn, who's got such a powerful voice, is what's happening behind the vocal. And on both sides, both behind her and behind the other side of the microphone. So I have a little trick that I take a big boom stand and I drape velvet over it, and then I move it in accordance to how far away from the back of the microphone to indicate how much reflection should be a part of it. And I don't compress her at all. There's nothing going on. The microphone's compressing that, I think.
What mic pre would you have used on that?
That's definitely a 610.
That's the UA or LA?
Yeah. LA 610.
LA 610,
it's a Mach 2. So, I mean,
is that the Universal Audio, the tube mic pre, or remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I have 8 of these.
And is that just the mic pre, or does it have the compression?
It does have the compressor, but I flip the compressor. I don't meter there's no metering going on with if the T4 is on, it's not moving. So if I'm lazy or forgot, I may not have flipped the compressor off, but it's definitely not compressing. The drums on that album, Marty Charters, who is sort of at the helm of that band, and I love dry drums. So that album, and then another album I worked on right during that period of time was from Miles Nielsen and the Rusted Hearts, called Heavy Metal. And those are like no cymbal albums, which was like a big thing for me for quite a while. I may have done that with you even.
Where the cymbals are not being played. Are they overdubbed, or are we just leaving them out entirely? Yeah.
Overdubs. Well,
depends, right?
They should be on there if we remember to put them on. In the mix mode is when the cymbals go on. I like dry drums when you have amazing vocals. And with Jocelyn, we did not want any mid-range or high mids competing with her voice at all. And the dynamics were going to come from other places. So as opposed to a cymbal hit, you listen to your favorite albums from back in the day, and you
don't hear tons of cymbals.
There's not a lot of cymbals.
Oh.
Yeah, all that Al Jackson stuff, and Bonham and Charlie and Ringo and all these great people, Al Green. There's just not a lot of cymbals. Hit the B3 a little harder, or make sure that the handoff between the verse into the chorus has some sort of slingshotting element or some dynamic that's created by something else other than sort of cavemanning the cymbal thing. So that was a big deal for me for years, was, stay away from too many cymbals.
What about the hi-hat? Are we thinking of the hi-hat as one of the cymbals where we're saving that too? Or is that more of a subdivision that's allowed to be there? It's the crashes and rides that we're staying away from.
Mainly crashes and rides, but I know for a fact on Miles's stuff, I towed. I mean, I'm not sure I let him use any hi-hat. On Jocelyn's, we did use hi-hat because the guy, Marty Charters, who is the guitar player and does a lot of the production on their stuff, he and I were real big into hi-hat as instrument. So it definitely was going to have a voice musically to indicate more than just keeping time and clanking around on it. I'm a big hi-hat snob. I like calling it a sock cap. They did back in the day.
I worked with an old blues artist named Roscoe Gordon. I produced a record for him, and he was referring to it as the sock hat, the old sock hat. Just stay on the sock hat, no drum fills.
Yeah.
Well, so what about the way that you would approach recording and miking the drums for stuff like that? Like, how do you like to get a really dead drum sound? I forgot which record it was. I don't know if it was the Jocelyn and the Sweet Compression, but I definitely heard one that had a really nice sort of pillowy, tight, dead kick drum. And I feel like that's the place I'm at now, is I'm like exploring the search for that. Like I've now had the front head off of my kick drum for quite a while, and I'm really enjoying that, but I don't want it to sound like, high-endy beater.
Yeah. I have a collection of beaters that I find to be, a big asset in the tempo, is a big indicator for me. and the dynamic of the track. So that's how I decide what beater I'm going to use. I've been open front head for 80% of the material I record for the last 10 years. And a little Lexington, Kentucky company that's now an international, success is Tempur-Pedic on pillows and mattresses. And I've had the same Tempur-Pedic pillow that I use, and I have it with a large mic stand bottom. And I put the mic stand bottom on the Tempur-Pedic, and then I move it in accordance to how much, how we've got the beater head tuned. So I might smush it up against it, or I might relax it a little bit. And then I will.
So the pillow's not huge. It's not as big as a pillow you'd sleep on. It's a little smaller one.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fit. It doesn't go from the front of the kick all the way out the back necessarily. It's
right. It's like, say a 6 by 14 or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And then it's smiley face, and then I set the boom stand.
That keeps it in place, keeps it where you want it. And then what about the mic choice itself?
Honestly, I like, if I can't, like a D12 is nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be, an old buyer, and I don't even know the model number, but about 80% of the time I'm with a 52. I like it. It does what I need.
Beta 52?
Yeah, 8052. Into an API. Sometimes I don't compress drums at all, ever, in tracking. And if I do, I might flip over to a 610 or maybe 1176, but not really. I sort of think it's up to the drummer to play it well. And I'm tough on drummers. Like that's where I spend a lot of my time, is on the drummer. I think they drum sounds make or break albums for me. I mean, there's some really cool albums out there, songs out there that have been ruined by bad drums. And there's some albums out there that I fell in love with because of the drum sound. Al Green, my dad just brainwashed me on that stuff. And then, I remember in the early 2000s, like listening to Songs for the Deaf by Queens of the Stone Age. And I thought, they figured out a way to not ape the same sound that we've heard in rock and roll forever.
Right.
I love that. I thought that was pretty brilliant. And those two, Al Green and Songs for the Deaf, Queens of the Stone Age, sort of the same mentality, which is, the drums have character. They have a lot of, they are really well played, and they stay out of the same frequency range that the most important thing, which is the vocal, live in.
Yeah. And was that with, do you remember if that was a record? That's Dave Grohl, but was that with Trina Shoemaker or with Eric Valentine maybe, or something like that?
I think that's with Eric Valentine and Adam Casper, maybe. Yeah. Cool. So, and then my other mics, I spent years, I didn't mic the toms. 10 years, I didn't mic a tom. I do now, because as I went down the rabbit hole of that dryer thing, I felt like I needed them. But I spent a lot of time in the Glenn Johns, a hybrid Glenn Johnsing. The only difference for me was I had a 40, which is sort of the big difference, but I had a 4038 sitting over top the snare, and I would get it as close to you as I could get it without it getting in the way of the drummer. Nowadays, I have an old Unidyne on the snare drum, and I may or may not mic the hi-hat. Generally, I don't. A couple 421s on the toms, and a pair of Coles. Sometimes fatheads, usually Coles.
Yeah, I haven't tried the fatheads yet.
They're cool.
Those.
They're a little more narrow.
But a little less expensive too.
A lot less expensive. But sometimes they sort of fit the room. The Coles are a little more saturated, a little more, and I like stuff close.
Yeah, how would you set up your double ribbons on a kit that's like a spaced pair above the kit looking down kind of thing?
So I'd have out in front, I'll put a 44 or a 4038 and point it towards the kick. And then the overhead would be a 67. And at which point now I'm listening to how much cymbal I need. And then that I'll put over hi-hat side or what would be the left side crash, if there is such a thing, and then one on the ride side. And then I'll put those as close as I can get to it. And then I sort of stay on the drummer's tuchus as to not hitting them too hard. And if we're going with sort of a Bonham Zeppelin sort of open sound, then I'll not use the ribbons.
Right. So those ribbons are the ones that are above the cymbals. So really we're thinking about this like 3 mics above the drum kit.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right on. And then with that, the pillow thing, what do you find is, I guess you go out and just have him play the drum, and you just listen to it with your ear and just kind of scoot it back and forth a little bit until it's got the sustain that you want. Do you find that typically it sounds like, typically the answer is that it seems, you think it sounds right when you're near the kick, but when you go in on the speakers, it's too long and you have to go out to the kick again and make it a little bit shorter?
I find it always sounds awful when I'm in the room with it. You know, I'm listening to everything else but the kick drum. And then when I'm in the control room, and you know, maybe this is a point of something like we're not supposed to say behind the curtain, but I have Drumagog for a reason. You know, I like things warm and dry for the most part. And if I like a roomy sound, then I'm going with a roomy sound and I'm committing to it. But I have no point of pride to say that when I get into the mixing stage, or maybe even in playback, and I really love that, but I feel like I need some more depth from the kick drum, then I'll take a sample. And I may have the sample might be me setting up another kick drum and having them kick at one time, and then having a 67 or something back off of it, and then sample that in and bring it in, and then use that as a nourishment. Or it might be something that pre-exists in my catalog of sounds that I've worked on over the years. I don't really care how I get there, as long as I'm able to get a level of presence that I think is indicative of what the end result should be. And then if I have to enhance that, then so be it.
Yeah. And then do you set up this Drumagog on sort of like an extra send? So you have your original kick track in your DAW session, but then there's a send next to it with the Drumagog, or do you put it on as a plug-in? Does that even matter?
It does matter. So my drums might only have, say, 7 channels, but by the time I'm mixing, I'll have 4 kicks. I'll have 3 snares. I guess we call that parallel. Is that right?
Right. Sure. Why not?
Yeah. So I'll have my normal kick, and I try not to
let's call it paranormal.
Paranormal.
Yeah. So we're doing this still in the vicinity of Halloween, rock stars. I've outed ourselves for the date of the interview.
Yeah. So I'll have my regular kick drum and nicely recorded in very little EQ, no compression. And then the next channel would be something that would be maybe a Drumagog, or might be distortion. And then another one might be an attack, and then another one might be a sub version of it. And so I'm treating all those like it's almost like an EQ.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Bring in more or less of any one of those.
Yeah. I love not touching the performance.
But in your world, so you're mixing in still Nuendo, or you're in Cubase now? Okay.
Nuendo.
Right. Okay. So then you would the audio would be on the one track and the others would be send returns or aux returns?
No, they're just separate duped.
So you just duplicate the track and put it on each one. Okay, yeah. Sometimes I find that easier to think about as well. You know,
I'm not real bright, so I need to be able to, And the cool thing is about that methodology is when I come in. So when I mix, I'll get something about 90% of the way there, and then I come in the next day and I flip it on. That sort of fader work where I can see everything in 5 minutes, I can make huge changes very quickly with fresh ears. And for me to have things on separate faders as opposed to sends and returns just tends to work better.
Yeah. So for example, one example I could think of is maybe you've got a parallel kick or snare thing that's on another track, but you only want it to come in the choruses. Now you just go in there and you just delete the verse ones on those particular tracks and have them appear. It's a lot easier than trying to program a bunch of mutes with automation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't. The only thing I automate at all is effects on a channel, an instrument, and my vocal ride. Everything else, I dupe it, and then put it on a separate thing. Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So there's another very cool record in your discography, the Congo Cowboys. Sounds like Dolly Parton playing Jolene from Africa. Tell us about that project. Am I even in the right part of the world when I said that?
You are, yeah. They're South African. And that was a cool, that's a great email to get when a band from a separate part of the world who has a completely different type of life than what we do. They sat around and were looking for a mixer, and they had these immaculately recorded tracks from where they're from, and they all threw songs in the hat that they'd been listened to, and for whatever reason, my name had popped up in two of the hats.
Nice.
The artist.
I didn't even know they wore hats over there.
I didn't either. Yeah. So they had hit me up with would I be interested in mixing it? And just on curiosity alone, that's a yes. More or less the fact that this is an interesting factoid. I love working on languages that I don't speak.
Yeah.
Because it's another instrument. It's a little bit less, I don't know, precious in some way. And I feel like that pragmatism helps me be a little bit more, I don't know, maybe a little more interesting with my work on those vocals side. So they sent me these tracks, and I don't know who their engineer is over there, but whoever it is, and I've worked on multiple tracks from different parts of Africa. So not to generalize, but somebody in that continent is recording very well.
Nice.
Like these tracks come in really clean and well branded, and then they just said, do your thing. We just do your thing. We've heard your stuff. And those, I've been very lucky over the last few years that type of mentality, that type of approach is more common with the artists these days when bringing me in to mix. And I take that as both a compliment and liberating. And they're beautiful people, absolutely wonderful phone Skype calls. And, if there's any downside to it at all, it's that I just haven't got to meet them in person.
Yeah.
And that all of our discussions, there's not enough hours in the day to coordinate a set at a good time. So sometimes the response could take a few minutes, but just beautiful people.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges even for doing a podcast, trying to do overseas interviews. It's a limitation on the ability to do that sometimes. Very cool. Well, let's go to our closing questions here. We'll just kind of hit the jam session real quick on our way out. When you started out in recording, what do you feel like was holding you back?
That I didn't know one single person that recorded. I literally had to learn pretty much everything on my own for that first 5 or 6 years. And so I would say geography. You kept asking everybody at the tennis court if they knew anything about music? Yeah. Yeah. Or they kept asking me to show up to the tennis court. Nice, man. How about some of the best advice you remember receiving? I won't mention who it is, but a very famous producer, mixer I met in Los Angeles. I was doing a gig out there, said, stay in Lexington, stay home, try to create a culture and an experience there. And if you're successful there, then it should unfold. Don't go be the magnet.
Nice.
Don't be one of the
magnet.
shards. Yeah, be the magnet.
I love it. Don't be one of the shards. That's great.
Yeah.
Good analogy. Somehow you're bringing in these industrial analogies, which I think somehow is related to Lexington, Kentucky. I'm not sure yet. Okay, how about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce? Something the rock stars could use on their next session this afternoon.
Try and figure out a unique piece of gear that really works for you. That is useful, that also sometimes I think perks the attention of the artist. For me, it was like pipes, pipes and tubes and mics and stuff. And using that as sort of a bit of a jumping off point. It's very inexpensive. And, I found it to be really musical.
Stuff you got excited about from Chad Blake?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that stuff's fun. I forgot who it was, like Stockhausen or something had these sound houses way, way, way back that were like these, beautiful wooden furniture items that you'd put a sound into one end and it would come out all funny on the other. And it just reminded me how cool it would be to just have more of that stuff. Different ways to stick a mic on an instrument and get cool sounds.
Absolutely.
How about a favorite hardware tool, something physical you love having around on a session? Obviously the Roland Space Echo and the 44.
Love the Space Echo. Yeah, I would say ribbon mics in this day and time have been probably the greatest asset towards making the transition from tape to digital. There was a period of time when it seemed that was like sort of those mics had gone out of favor. But I love the way it saturates sound. So that was a big piece of gear for me. It's not super sexy, but I like ribbon mics a lot.
Right on, man. How about sharing a favorite software tool or something that you're excited about now?
Decapitator, always.
Yeah.
I mean, I could mix an entire album on a Decapitator. That one plugin could do everything.
Give us a useful Decapitator tip. Something. Do we just go through it and then just turn the knob up more and pick one of the letters at the bottom, or are there some other things we should be thinking about trying?
I like to, I use it a lot on kick drums to create a sense of space, and I'll use it as a paralleled vocal, where I'll dupe the vocal to a different track and then just destroy it with a Decapitator.
Rather than using the blend knob that's in it already.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. But sometimes I might want to EQ or compress the primary vocal dynamically that brings out some less than pleasant things from the Decapitator.
Right. Good point. We want to treat each one differently. All right. How about a resource for the business side of this? If we want to record records for more than just a hobby?
Well, I think that first off, I think gear is something that you have to have, but it's I don't know whose quote this was, but somebody said one time that it was not necessarily just the gear that you have, but the relationship that you have with it. And so I think like reverb.com, I love it. I mean, it's like a drug, but you can go on there and they're sending out these informative pieces about the history of certain pieces of gear and the way things are recorded. And then they link that up to different pieces that you can purchase. And I think that they're fair. I think the community of sellers is the checks and balances and accountability of it is really great. And then the other thing is, for me, Instagram and Facebook have been my primary marketing resources. And the other thing is people like you. I met friends in a very organic way who are intelligent, smart people that, don't play too close to the chest with every decision that they're making, and have been great educational tools for me.
Right on, man. All right. Last two questions here. An organizational tip or resource, something that'll help us keep our shit together in the studio.
Dropbox is my favorite tool.
Yeah.
I save stuff on it. I share stuff on it. It creates a thread, a narrative for sometimes years that I'm able to share with an artist. And, I just finished a mix a couple of weeks ago from somebody, and we started on it in 2012 or 11, and it just sat on Dropbox. He accidentally found it and said, "You know what? Can you go in and finish that song?" So, once again, that's not the sexiest piece, but that's the one that's been great organizationally.
Yeah,
for me.
It goes all the way back to you collaborating through the internet on those original advertising recordings and things like that. All right, so here's our closing question, Dwayne, and thank you also for being here with us for this long stretch, man. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and we're going to go back in time, zip, 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 like that. And you're going to go find young Dwayne. Wow, if we find young Wayne, I don't even know what we'd ask that guy, but we'll go back and find young Dwayne long before you were down here at the Toy Box. And you say, listen, dude, here's the most important thing you need to know to be a recording studio rock star yourself one day. What would you go back and give yourself as far as advice?
Trust yourself. I think that the best decisions that I made were to not look outward, but to look inward, to follow your instincts. I think that I was sort of lucky that early on that my taste was accidentally pretty good with what I was listening to. And I think the worst decisions that I ever made was second guessing and sort of being a follower as opposed to just sort of trusting my instincts. And those instincts led me to meeting some really good people as opposed to people that were just trying to be a temporary part of my existence and sell me something that was, not very genuine. So, I would go back and say, you're going to do just fine. And, I still like to think that young Dwayne is sitting right here, right now. And I tell myself that every day.
I like that answer, man. I didn't have to go back very far, dude.
Yeah.
Groovy, man. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the show. I loved hearing everything you had to share with us. It's great to hang with you again. And I love the thought of you, being there as part of a creation of a whole scene in Lexington, Kentucky and all across Kentucky. And I know you're really proud of that as well and proud of the music that's from there. So let the rock stars know, how can they go find you? Where would you like them to go check out your stuff? I remind you, there's a playlist in the show notes, rock stars. Please check that out. But if they're ready to make their next amazing sounding record with you, how should they find you?
Well, go to your thing, so that they can link up from there. I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Dwayne Lundy, DuaneLundy. And that's where I sort of live on that world as far as interacting with people, hand-to-hand combat with them. And, my favorite business card is the artist that I've had the privilege of working with. So through your playlist, if they find some sort of, brother or sister in music, through those people, then I might be the right guy to have a conversation with.
At least a first cousin.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks for hanging with us, man. Great to see you. And I look forward to seeing you in person again soon, man. Give me a shout when you're in Nashville.
I will. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who helped make this episode possible. API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, SonarWorks, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of their plugins. And sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at sampley.app, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. And don't forget to use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in the description of the podcast. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to give a big thank you to our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks, guys. And thanks so much for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.